in Mossman in Sydney, which is a harbourside bushy suburb, and my current studio is in Headland Park, which is in a nature area. So I actually have French doors, and like at the moment I'm looking out through my doors and into bushland and through the harbour. And that has been my studio for about a year now. And before that, I had a studio out in the bush at Terry Hills, which is sort of the outer area of the Northern Beaches in Sydney.
Sounds really beautiful. Sounds really nice.
It is. And I mean, the reason I've chosen these sort of studios, or the last studio, I was awarded that studio as a part of a Northern Beaches Artist in Residence. But when that finished, I moved to my current studio because nature is a very important part of my work and my practice. And so it's really important for me to, there's so many studios that are in, I don't know, industrial parks or, at the basement of a gallery or something like that. And for me, I absolutely have to be able to see the trees and the sky and the birds and so on, because that is where my inspiration comes from, and I see myself as a sort of a conduit to be telling the stories of the natural area and the landscape, both seen and unseen around me. So it's important for me in my practice to be working in a space where I have access to that.
Yeah, perfect. And so, did you grow up in Sydney?
So I grew up out in country New South Wales, so up coastal for a little bit, and then out central New South Wales. And so I grew up not an urban person at all. We lived in town, but my parents worked in the school system, so we had school every single school holidays until I left home in a tent, sometimes 6 weeks in a tent in a national park over Christmas time. And so we would hike every day, obviously no TV, no radio, no such thing as mobile phones back then. So no connection, which seems so weird with the current world that we're in now, cooking over the fire. And so from those experiences, I developed a very strong relationship with with nature. I don't know whether I'd be doing this art practice now had I not had a childhood like that.
Yeah, awesome. So those early childhood sort of experiences kind of really impacted in how you work now.
Yeah, I absolutely, and I seek out those experiences as an adult now. I've just come back from walking solo for a week in the New England National Park on the Waterfall Way, sort of halfway between Armidale and Coffs Harbour. And I spent a week immersed in nature in that ancient Gondwana rainforest. And so those sort of experiences absolutely are central to the work that I do.
And as your process, so like when you are in nature and you're doing these walks, and are you taking photographs or compiling drawings, or is it things that you sort of take back to the studio?
So for me, I am not a drawer, which is probably one of the reasons why I didn't do art really until much later, because I didn't really do art at school or uni or anything like that. So I don't draw because it's not a natural thing for me, and I will take photos, but it will be not for referencing for later on. So my experience of, and the reason that I do be like there I'm in nature is because what I'm seeking is probably very different to probably a lot of other people. It's not necessarily what I see, it's what I sense. And I am wanting to sort of witness and explore the invisible, non-material realm within the landscape. So that sort of liminal state between sight and sound, and it's the interconnectedness that I am wanting to experience when I'm in those spaces. So I'm not walking with intent of exercise. I can stand in front of a tree for half an hour and build a relationship with that tree. So when I had my studio in the bush, my practice was not necessarily doing it in the sense of making. I made sure that at least an hour, sometimes 5 hours, I would pack, lunch, and I have a little tiny little camp fold-out chair, and I would walk into the bush and sit in one spot for hours, and that allowed me to experience that interconnectedness of everything around me, and that allowed me to then come back to the studio and tell the stories of that experience.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just taking notes. Okay. So in terms of like themes that are coming up in your work, so you've sort of mentioned that sort of connectedness with nature and sort of telling the story of your experiences. Are there any other themes that kind of emerge through your work or like connect them?
Yeah, so the stories that I'm telling, so I've just recently, my last body of work, but the one before that was all about hope. So how that sense of connectedness and appreciation of the more than human world is an essential source of hope. So it links us to future possibilities and the greater living world around us, and it allows us to access that wonder and joy that only nature provides. And we absolutely saw that during all of our lockdowns. People just sought out nature. I mean, the tracks that I walk from my home and around my studio, there were new tracks made through the bush because so many people were walking, because they were seeking out that sense of joy. So absolutely that idea of how nature can impact hope is definitely a theme. And also my ultimate theme is around how that connection and experiencing that interconnectedness that humans have and with a more than human world should inspire, and hopefully my work does this, inspire responsibility for conserving the natural world and recognizing that interdependence between the welfare of humans and that natural world. And so it's amazing that what I see and I notice is very different to maybe a lot of other people, because when I'm walking, I'm actually sensing, and so through my work, that is what I'm wanting people to experience as well. So it's not just that they stand in front of my work and just experience the shapes and the forms of it. it's actually the energy embedded in it as well, so that they're sensing that liminal state between sight and sound and observing with spirit as well.
Yeah. And just in terms of the materials that you use, so from your work in the gallery at the moment, I can see that you're using like natural materials, but you're also coupling that with the found materials with copper.
Yeah.
What's the relationship between those two materials? Is that, as you've sort of discussed, in terms of the natural world and the modern world coming together? Or?
Well, it's actually because when I first started my practice, about 2012, I started exploring basketry. I made the decision that I only wanted to use foraged, found, gifted plant material. And because for me, it's a statement around consumerism, and that we are surrounded by beauty, and it's about using that material as opposed to, going to an art store. Not that there's obviously anything wrong with that, but that was absolutely my parameters that I chose to do. And with the copper, what I wanted to do was explore this idea of what's contained in the earth. So we're seeing things that are in front of us, like the vines and the trees and the seed pods and all of the things that I collect. But for me, it was also what was beneath our feet as well. And so I decided to start using copper as a way of connecting the earth to what was above the earth as well. And so I predominantly use, because it's a part of my parameters as well of my practice, I predominantly use recycled copper. It's electrical wire that I use, not the telephone wire that's coated in the plastic. They're pulled out of, massive air conditioning units and so on. And I go to a recycling place and there's dumpsters, and I dumpster dive, and so that, and obviously the same with organic material. With the copper, I don't know what I'm going to find, or I don't know how that copper, because there's so many different types of copper wire that is used from an electrical perspective. So that actually adds a whole other layer of joy, but also complexity, because that copper performs in its own way, as does the organic material.
Yeah, perfect. So just in regard to the techniques that you use, so you stated that in 2012, that's when you started doing basketry. Is the weaving and the basketry the main sort of technical process you use throughout your works?
Yes, it's the only technical techniques that I use. There's a little bit of construction at times, but it is definitely, I would describe myself as sculptural basketry. And obviously the basketry that I do, the techniques that I use, I really only stick to 3 different types of techniques: twining, random weave, and looping, because I wanted to become an expert and just really explore those, I guess, rather than trying to do everything under basketry. And I also am not interested in doing my work is very, very precise and time consuming, but it's not, that really traditional basketry. I'm very interested in contemporary, modern basketry that allows me to very much sit in that artistic telling stories space.
Yeah. Okay. And I noticed on your works in the gallery also you've used charcoal.
Yes. So I create my own pigments. So I will use pigments from materials that I collect. So I use charcoal predominantly. I've used clay. I use ash. When I went out camping out in Central Australia, I much to the people that I was with who just had no idea why I was doing this, but I collected the ash from the fire each day, and so I and that's a part of that overall theme of mine, that I use material that I collect as opposed to buy.
Yeah, and they're often are they the locations where you source these materials? Do they always have some significance to you, or are they?
No, not always. But I obviously only collect in places that and that's actually something really worth mentioning from a basketry perspective. Only ever collect in places that you have permission to, and obviously not in national parks. But often there will be places that I will collect where I am, and I know, because quite often I won't have an idea about what I'm doing until I do it. Like the material, it's very much a co-creation at that time. I do no planning at all. There is no sketch. I have no sketchbook. It's very much an intuitive practice. But I will collect material, and with the idea of knowing that at some point in time, then that is what will come into that practice.
Okay, so when you work, it's just it is like intuitive. So you sit in the space and it just sort of comes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and that sort of comes to that central theme of mine that that it's a spiritual connection to the form that I'm creating as well, and this idea that we are constantly in control of most aspects of our life, and that we as humans have developed this very cerebral practice of seeing the world around us. And so what my art is and my practice is actually developing a intuitive spiritual conversation with the materials that I'm working with. And so, and while obviously I am the artist and I'm creating the forms, I actually see it as a co-creation, and it's a very important part of the work that I do, because when you're using organic material, it has its own energy, its own mind, essentially. So if I'm trying to make a piece of vine go in a direction that I want it to and it doesn't, it will break. So you have to really listen to the material and and develop the narrative, that collective narrative of the material as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it's quite. Your practice is quite respectful to the materials that you're using.
Well, absolutely. It's very respectful of the materials, where they've come from, and understanding that. I mean, I guess a lot of people just see a tree, or just see the vine, or maybe often, honestly, most people don't even notice. And so it's that starting with the observation and extending it to there. And so by sharing the dialogue with the natural materials and allowing them to inform the narrative of what I'm making and my body of work, it actually means that stories are formed and shared from the landscape in transformational ways, in a language that provides new meanings and relationships between spirit, nature, humans, and the landscape and the interconnection of it all. So that's ultimately how I work.
Perfect, thank you. And just in terms of your processes and techniques, is there a historical reference to the processes and the techniques that you use?
The basketry techniques that I use are, I actually think that they started at the beginning of humanity. For me, it was the first innovation, really, of how, as humans, do we fish? How do we take berries from one place to another place? And then obviously it evolved over those years. So it's so ancient. It dates back to them. And when I'm doing my practice, I think that what I really wanted to do when I started at the beginning of just exploring this, it was very much this idea of removing myself from this insane digital world that we're in now. I had a very high pressure business. I was on the computer 12 hours a day, where, I see people walking down the street on their mobile phones. Like, it's just, and so I think for me, it was very much reaching out and finding something that was so ancient, and something that really helped sustain and evolve humanity. So absolutely, and interestingly too, baskets played a real key role in trade-based economies. So baskets were woven using the natural materials and then they were traded as well. So, clothing, homes, the shelters that we had as well. So, tens and tens and tens of thousands of years. So my practice, the random weave, well, certainly the twining and the looping dates back to way back then. And I mean, it hasn't changed all that much over that time. So definitely it was those techniques. The way that I use them is in a very contemporary way, in a very unique to me way. But it's definitely, they started so many years ago.
Okay, let's talk a couple more questions. Just in regard to you've got two pieces at the gallery. Your piece of Time of No Time. Is there any messages or background inspiration that you can offer regarding that piece?
So I wanted to do, and often the name of the work doesn't reveal itself until I've finished it, but sometimes as I'm weaving, because you can imagine with my work, it's so time consuming. Yeah. It is, hours and hours and days and months. And some of the material that I'll have had for 2 years before I will stand in front of it and then go, okay, it's time, let's start working together. And so that work, of a time of no time, that body of work that I did in that was very much exploring the idea of our spiritual connection to nature and how I could show the access to the visceral and the organic landscapes of spirit within nature. And, that idea, as I mentioned before, exploring the invisible, non-material realm. And for me, of a time of no time, is that we are so connected to time, like this linear time as humans, particularly where we are now. We're constantly looking at time and judging ourselves based on time as well. And so I wanted to do that piece for me, particularly, that copper coming down was exploring this idea, that copper coming down in a linear way over the really organic shape of the vine, was exploring this idea of there was a time where there was no time, and nature has no time. The non-human world has no time. Their time is based on cycles, and how the landscape is throughout, through heat and cold and so on. So this work represents this exploration of this idea that time is actually a construct.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, a human construct.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. I just one more thing. Last question. What do you enjoy most about the processes that you use?
This is just this incredible, joyful experience for me, particularly because I didn't grow up thinking that I was going to be an artist. I was, very academic and very career focused, and I never had the opportunity to explore this side of me. So the fact that I've actually now a full-time artist is this extraordinary. I'm so incredibly grateful that I've been able to create this life for myself. And so the joy of being able to be in a position where I tell the stories of the things around me and the stories within the landscape, and the connection and the connection between more than human world and us is extraordinarily joyful. And I know that I've had a good day when I've sat down and done some weeding. It's at the end of the day, I just go, I think, well, that was a good day because I had the opportunity to do some basketry and some weaving. And while the work that I do using the copper wire in particular is so extraordinarily difficult and complicated, it's extraordinary to see, because I won't know what it's going to look like until it's finished. And so sitting in that sense of flow and trusting intuition day after day is an incredible experience. Particularly in my former life, I didn't have really the opportunity to do that. And I hope that by people seeing my work and experiencing it and standing in front of it, they actually get that sense of the stories that it is telling them, but also the sense of joy from it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It just, sorry, I know I said it was the last question, but actually...
No. Whatever. Yeah, as many as you want. I'm happy to talk about it. I love talking about it.
Just the process of the copper wire, you said it was difficult. Do you use any tools to assist with that, or is that all just done by hand?
So it's all done by hand. I have these little sort of jewellery wire cutters and pliers. They're called bent nose pliers. But so that copper wire, because it's recycled, and it's out of a barrel. So I guess the people that pull them out of the the big machines and stuff, often they'll because they sell that to the recycling place, and then what I buy, they put it on a weighing machine, and then I buy it, and so it comes in. I'm trying to just think about how to describe it. So it's not all jumbled, but it is, there will be like a thickness of, say, 2 centimeters of wire that I actually have to unwind.
So like coils.
Yeah, they do coils, thank you. So but within those coils, there will be like a thickness, for example, of one, massive chunk of really long lengths, and within that there will be about 50 pieces of wire. So I will spend, say, a week before I even start unwinding those 50 pieces from that huge chunk of wire.
Wow, yeah, it's an incredibly long process.
And then if you think about the material that I've collected, so I collect that, I spend days and days and days collecting that material, drying that material, waiting for it to, because with basketry you tend not to use material green because it shrinks, and so therefore that will impact the robustness of your structure. So it is so insanely time consuming, but
down that way.
Yeah, but that's such an important part of the way that we see time now. So it means that what I'm working on, I have such a relationship to what I'm doing because I've spent so many, because the weaving takes weeks and sometimes months. So I've spent so much time with that material. By the end of it, of course I will have a relationship with it, and also obviously because I'm choosing to have a relationship with it as well. But also we live in this world now where we want something now. We want to download that app now, and we want to get somewhere right now. We want that instant gratification, and the digital world that we live in is actually making us even more so. That, I see that in my nephew. Like he's young and he's just so used to having everything right now. And so for me, my practice is the antithesis of that, and really going back to this idea of, so what would happen if we don't have it now? What would happen if I had to work for a long time and do so much effort to be able to get to this form? So that is a really important part of my practice, is exploring that, and also how that makes me feel. Like there are days where I just, the looping that I do with a copper wire, it takes so much patience. And obviously there are windy days for me. It's really windy. I'm like, do you know what? I might just go and have a swim or go for a walk instead, because I will know that, or if it's not in flow, then walk away. So, it's very much about this idea of exploring more than what we're just presented with, or what we have expectations of now.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. It's really nice. It's kind of like a slowing down. Which I really like about it.
It's completely this idea of slowing down. And I feel like, as with through all my workshops that I teach, I talk about this idea of how to access this slow craft, this slow art, and because we are not slow anymore. and how being into this slow practice, or how it feels in your body and your senses, how that is actually a really healing thing, because we're being on all the time and wanting everything right now all the time, I don't think is necessarily a healthy thing to be. And so, yeah, and coming back to this, you know, no computer, no nothing other than just your hands and your heart connection is a really, really extraordinarily powerful experience.